Why did you take this case?
It's what I do. It's so that people ask me that so many times, and I can't come up with a better or different reason than this is what I do. When the case first became open to me, I looked at it, and it just seemed to fit my skill set more than I could ever have planned or imagined.
What were the circumstances when you first met George?
Strangely enough, when I walked into the jail cell where George was waiting, I had a couple pictures in my mind. I had a picture of Trayvon Martin being a very young boy, maybe 13 or 14 years old. I had a picture of George Zimmerman being about 250 pounds with an attitude, because that's the picture that I saw, 2005 picture when he was very heavy. And that's okay. Those are the type of people that I represent, generally speaking. I walked into that jail cell, and one of the most amazing sights to me was this small, young, respectful, quiet, scared individual, literally half the size that I thought he would be, not physically, but the presentation. And it really took me back. I spent a couple hours with him, and he was very respectful, very open, very concerned about his situation. But, and from that day forward, I knew, one, I'd be representing him, and two, where this case was going to go.
Was it a concern for you that he might have been a racist?
When I saw the 12-year-old Trayvon Martin picture and the 270-pound George Zimmerman picture, yes, no question. And strangely enough, I think that's why most of the people who believe that George Zimmerman is a racist today got their belief when they saw those two pictures 16 months ago. And you can't not have that thought.
Whose fault is that imagery dichotomy? Because I think everyone knows what you're talking about, that at the beginning, the images were very different. You had the first pictures of George Zimmerman. He was in what looked like jail attire. Mm-hmm. And then you had a very, very young-looking Trayvon Martin. Whose fault is that? It was a wonderfully created and crafted public relations campaign by the people who are assisting the Martin family. It's Ben Crump and other people. I don't discredit what he did as long as he acknowledges that's exactly what happened. Do you think that George Zimmerman would have even been charged had Ben Crump not been pulled into this? No. Ben Crump or someone like him. Because had Ben Crump not gotten involved in the case, maybe for some good reasons to begin with. If he believed that there was something here that was being swept under the rug, then get on into it. I'm very okay with that. But you didn't quite say it that way. You made it sound like it was Ben Crump, George Zimmerman would be free at this time, and we would not be in a trial. That's correct. I think that it was a made-up story for purposes that had nothing to do with George Zimmerman, and that they victimized him. They complain about Trayvon Martin being victimized. George Zimmerman was victimized by a publicity campaign to smear him, to call him a racist when he wasn't, and to call him a murderer when he wasn't. And so Angela Corey and the governor and all of those that had a hand in bringing about this prosecution, they were all manipulated by Ben Crump? Oh, I don't know that it was Ben Crump doing all that manipulation, but I'm very surprised that the prosecution team decided not to take this case to a grand jury when one was sitting and paneled and ready to take on the case of the state of Florida versus George Zimmerman and determine whether or not there was enough evidence and enough information to charge him with any crime. Rather than do that, which was the default position that could have happened, they decided have a press conference, pray with the victim's family, and then announce second-degree murder charges. How much of this was politics? It's guesswork on my behalf, but if I enter into this formula an element or ingredient of politics, a lot more makes sense. A lot more about the way the case was handled early on, the way it was turned into a racial event when seemingly and now positively it wasn't. When a special prosecutor is brought in, when there doesn't seem to be any reason why Norm Wolfinger, the sitting prosecutor, had perfect opportunity to handle this case. Matter of fact, I've deposed 3 of his assistants who were busting their butts on this case. So they were ready to go forward, and we had a grand jury set. So when a special prosecutor comes in, then waives the grand jury, and then files charges that most good legal analysts, including Alan Dershowitz, say that's an abomination, you have to wonder
if there is not some outside influencing, pressuring decisions.
Much has been made about race in this case. Where do you see race in this case?
I see race being injected into this case in the first week that it existed, and I see that it's never left this case, even though time and time again, race has been proven not to have been an element in George's consideration at that night.
This case, to many, is a cause. It's not just a case. These would be people who are very much in support of Trayvon Martin, who believe that there was great wrong here. And in essence, that this is a civil rights case. And I mean that in the full sense of advancing civil rights. You are perceived as the man standing in the way of this civil rights case.
Right.
How do you handle that?
Very simply, I will walk over to that side, put my arm around those people, and walk with them on a civil rights issue. I've represented young black males for 30 years. I know better than most people, better than most of the people who are complaining, how young black males are treated in the criminal justice system, and we need to fix it. We need to address those problems. It's not just in the system, it's in the schools, it's in the churches, it's in the families, it's in the homes. We need to address it. Get your crosshairs off George Zimmerman, and I will join you. Keep your crosshairs on George Zimmerman, and don't tell me that I'm getting in the way, because you are. Because you're the one who's sitting back telling me that this is a civil rights case when George had nothing to do with civil rights. This was an unfortunate event between two people.
You took, I think what some might consider risks during the trial, one of them being that you cross-examined a grieving mother.
Yes.
Any regrets on that?
No. I hope that people think, or I think, that I handled it properly and respectfully. I have handled, I think, 40 or so murder cases, and in every one of those murder cases, you're going to have some interaction